Good afternoon and welcome to the UK Genesis podcast with me, Ben Furphy.
Hi, I'm Gary Jones.
And this week we're joined by Welsh design extraordinaire Tomos Jones. Obviously, a lot of people will be aware of Tomos in the Genesis community and be aware that he is quite well involved in both the design and the development side of Genesis framework, at least using it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Tomos?
Well, I'm a freelance WordPress and Genesis designer based in the UK. I work mainly with other freelancers, small businesses, and agencies across the world, designing, developing, and helping to maintain their websites and their client websites as well.
Okay. So you said that you tend to work with other agencies and developers. I mean, how much end client work do you do?
Most of the work that I've done in the past has come either in the form of being outsourced from a friend of mine who owns a search engine optimization agency in Dubai. Otherwise, the work comes in mainly from fellow freelancers, outsourcing typically the development side of things to me. They'll probably hand me a PSD file or a Fireworks image file and tell me, go ahead and build that.
Okay. And how did you get involved in web development and web designing originally?
I think it started when I was in school. It was about year 9 or 10, and we were doing. We were asked to build a website, and I started building it using a Microsoft front page. From there on, I started playing about a bit more. Installed WordPress.
That didn't deter you?
What?
Using front page didn't deter you?
No, 'cause at the time I had no idea what I was doing, so I moved on from there. Then I started using Dreamweaver to build static websites, and then I found WordPress and I started building WordPress-powered sites then. And yeah, from then I took a break when I was in university, and when I came back, I started after finishing my courses in uni, started working again with WordPress, and yeah, it's just kind of stuck from there then.
Okay. Just a quick note, anybody who wants to ask Tomos a question, simply tag your question on Twitter with the hashtag UKGenesis, and we will put the questions to Tomos. So you were saying that you started off building static websites. Was it a personal decision to move towards using WordPress, or were you working sort of and doing a little bit of freelance at the time, and that sort of pushed you?
I think I started off with static websites, and after that, I remember when I really got into things, we had the tutorial website boom. I think it was something like, it was Pixel to Life. I started introducing a bit of WordPress tutorials on that, and it's just something I sort of fell into then. And instead of just starting up with a blank index file, I just install WordPress locally and start building from there then. And yeah, it's a no-brainer then just to keep on working with a platform that I enjoy using.
Okay. And I guess the next question naturally is, when did you start working with Genesis and how did you come across it?
I've been aware of Genesis for a while. I think one of the earliest interactions I had with it was actually a comment that Gary left on my blog about 4 or 5 years ago. I was it's during the time when Thesis was starting to get being talked about, and I wrote a post defending the framework, so to speak, and then Gary pretty much wrote a blog post in my comment section telling me how good Genesis was and maybe I should take a look at it. I think the final nail in the coffin then was Thesis 2.0 came out, and I just went, I'm not touching this. And I jumped over to Genesis, installed it. Took a little bit of time to get used to how things worked, but from there on then, I've just stuck with this framework.
It's a good point because quite a few people know that you were quite a hardcore advocate of Thesis, you could say. When you moved over to Genesis, did you find that people followed you over in terms of customers that you've been working with, or did you end up finding that you had to find a whole new range of customers?
most of the people I worked with, I built the projects to start with on thesis, and then if they came back with more work for me, then um, once I'd changed my development practice to suit using or to build websites with Genesis, I'd just suggest to them, I built with Genesis now. Do you mind if we use this framework on this project? And like 99% of the time, they turn around and say, yeah, that's fine. And I found that making the switch from thesis to Genesis, especially with client work, didn't take that much convincing to do at all.
Can you remember what you wrote on Thomas's blog, Gary?
Not at all. He probably find it because I think he sent it to me a little while ago. But yeah, he did. But there's kind of like 20 paragraphs of stuff.
Well, that would fill the rest of the show, I suppose.
So yeah, so I'm not going to go through it. But yeah, it was. I was obviously quite passionate about Genesis at that point as well. So.
So I mean, in terms of it, obviously, you moved from one framework to another. Did you consider at any point not using a framework? Did you consider, or was it just, I'm going to use a framework, it's either a case of which one, and it turned out to be Genesis?
I started with the thesis then, and I started looking elsewhere. I had a look at things like the underscores framework, some of the Woo theme stuff, and I was pretty sad that I wanted to use a framework, mainly coming over from thesis and the fact that I knew there was a solid base for me to start working off. I didn't have to spend time doing X, Y, and Z on each project. That the framework covered that for me. So it was a no-brainer jumping from one framework to another.
Okay. And obviously, in terms of development, isn't the only thing that you do. You also are quite an adept designer as well. You designed the UK Genesis website. You actually coded it, for example. What do you prefer doing? Do you prefer designing, developing, a mix of the two?
A mix of the two. I'd like to take on more projects in the future where maybe it's more design, just to experience that. But equally at home, jumping into Scratch and building a website layout as I am jumping into Sublime or Atom and building the thing from scratch.
Do you find that you prefer to split your projects if you're working on the design? So if you work on the design, you outsource the development to someone else, or are you happy to work on both?
I'm happy at the moment to work on both, and I haven't come across a situation of a project that's warranted me outsourcing any of the steps yet. But I'm equally happy to put my hands up on a project and say I can't do this. I'm happy to outsource it.
Okay. And do you outsource to UK people, or do you find that you have to outsource to people outside of the UK to find the right skill set?
I think it's about building a relationship with fellow designers and developers. I've got no problem if it came to it, outsourcing work to someone in America if I knew them beforehand, or if it was someone in the UK. If I'm happy that there's a good relationship between the two of us, I'm happy to outsource to whoever.
Okay. And obviously you've been involved with the UK Genesis website from almost the beginning. Where do you see that going?
I think I've seen it develop from ideas in an IRC chat a year or so ago to where it is now. I think it's going to be down the line a good resource for people looking for UK developers with a Genesis framework, especially if we do what we want to and possibly add a directory at some point in the future to make it easier for people to find, say, a developer in the UK or a designer in the UK.
Do you think that there's a shortage of Genesis developers in the UK, that it's difficult to find the ones that are out there at the moment, or do you think that it's really not that difficult, but the directory will essentially just bring them all together in one place?
I think the directory will definitely help. I think that is something that I think possibly the two, you, Ben, and possibly Gary, noted, especially in the WordCamp Birmingham. The slight mention of the Genesis framework was greeted with a not so positive response as the other things were. But maybe the directory and what we're doing with the UK Genesis website will help change people's minds about it.
Okay. I guess one of the big things that, in particular, I've noticed, and that it's happening personally to me. It's how I'm seeing a lot of it in the Genesis Slack group, is that people are increasingly moving towards tools like ACF, CMB2 to try and make their websites easier to use for end clients. What's your position on that?
If anything makes updating content for the clients down the line easier, I'm all for it. Simply.
Okay. And got a relevant question from Devinder. What's your favorite tool for creating custom templates and custom fields?
At the moment, advanced custom fields, simply because of how fast I can build things out in the back end. And I think that the interface that it gives the client on the posts and blog posts and pages sections is a little bit nicer than that you're getting custom meta box too that I've used on previous projects as well.
Okay. Gary?
Yep.
Do you want
Okay, so we said you obviously like ACF. Are there any other kind of key plugins that you install pretty much on any site to start with?
On my desktop server blueprints, I'll bundle in. I've got ACF and CMB2, so depending on the project, I'll just deactivate one and delete it if I don't need it. I'll normally include gravity forms. As much as I hate the CSS and stuff that comes out of it, I like it as a form solution. If I'm using that, then I'll use Carrie Dill's Trump plugin just to make things a little bit easier. I installed the Query Monitor plugin that you mentioned by default, and that's extremely useful. And there's another plugin I came across last week, actually, WP Basis, I think. It's a plugin that replaces the default dashboard in WordPress with tabs that you can customize. You can customize how many tabs and the tab content. So I'm building that out at the moment now, extending it to suit my needs. So I'll be deploying that on client sites as well.
Oh, sounds good. You said within your desktop server blueprint you've got ACF and CMB2, and you said it's kind of depending on the client. What is the determining factor between, you think, whether CMB2 is more suitable or whether ACF is more suitable for a particular project?
I'll take a look at the project, and one thing that differentiates the two is the fact that you have to define your fields with CMB2 through code. If I want to complete a project a bit quicker, I've got my ACF presets, and it's easier for me to point and click than it is to write the code. That's simply it at the moment. I think maybe if I start experimenting a bit more with the CMB2 plugin, I might 3-4 months down the line turn around and say I prefer using that to ACF. But I think only time will tell that.
Yep. Okay. So as well as starting off with, well, at some point throughout your workflow, there's obviously an instance of desktop server in there. Can you kind of outline what the rest of your workflow is, from kind of first getting in contact with a client or getting a lead to following that up to agreeing something, assuming getting desktop server kind of instance running locally in there to perhaps a staging site and a live site? Can you just outline kind of what your kind of methodology is?
So if a client gets in touch, before my redesign, I usually end up asking him or her through an email what exactly do they want if they haven't stated already, and then during the back and forth we'd agree on things like the budget, what exactly do they want doing. During that time you find out things like if they've got their branding sorted, they've got the colours, if they've got an overall idea of what they want. If they want to design, then I'll probably jump into pencil and paper while I'm just reading through what they've sent me to give me a brief idea, things like that. And then I'll typically, if it's design, then I'll jump into Sketch. Now, it used to be Photoshop, and mock things up there. If I come up with something, I'll send that to the client, get their feedback. Once that's locked in, I'll start developing. Normally develop locally using desktop server. I used to develop a MAMP, build something and then push it live to a test server so they can add their content to make sure they're happy, and then launch after that then.
You said that you moved away from Photoshop to Sketch. What was the reason for that?
I think Photoshop got a bit heavy, a bit bloated for me. It's a great tool for photo editing and stuff like that, but the more I started playing with Sketch and experimenting and things like that, I just came to the realization that it's a great tool for photo editing, but it's not what I want to use to build or design websites. So I removed it from a dock, and I've only got Sketch there now.
Okay, so I mean, what sort of percentage would you say you do? Sorry, pardon me. Between custom or projects that require custom design and maybe customizing existing templates?
Up to about now, I'd say it's about a 50-50 split. I'll see most of the work that I'll get that's maintenance work is probably modifying a theme that's already in place, and that could be something that's custom or something from ThemeForest or something like that. Otherwise, it's typically a custom build starting from scratch with the design.
You mentioned ThemeForest. There are some Genesis developers who only work with the Genesis framework, and there are some who will work with a number of themes, including sort of various themes from different places, including ThemeForest. Where do you sit on that spectrum?
If I had my own way, I would develop 100% with Genesis. But there are some instances I'm still doing work for people who might have a theme that's not Genesis based, and in some circumstances I'll turn them away. Recently I had a couple of people come in through Odesk and a profile I haven't updated in years regarding thesis work, and I won't touch that anymore. But it depends on the client, depends on the relationship I have with the client, if I'm happy to jump into a ThemeForest or another pre-made theme. But if I had my own way, it would be 100% Genesis.
Do you offer Genesis customization? Sorry, not customization, conversion. So if somebody came to you and said, I really want to use this ThemeForest theme, you looked at the code itself was a mess, but you knew that you could essentially convert it for about the same price. I mean, would you offer that type of service?
If they were desperate to include, to have something based on the Genesis framework, I would consider it. But again, it depends. If they want all the bells and whistles that a ThemeForest theme that they might like converted over, I probably would not touch that project.
Okay.
So a couple of things there. You mentioned about kind of costing up for the client, potential client. First question is, do you use kind of value-based pricing, or do you hourly, or is it project rate? And what sort of business-related tools do you use for getting that quote out, if anything, for the clients?
So I used to do a project-based pricing, which is something, looking back, I regret so much doing that now.
Why do you regret that?
After hearing, I think Ben got me onto the idea of value-based pricing, things like that, and looking at how I could have possibly charged more by giving the client a better value. I could have probably made more money on some of my past projects. So I'm slowly transitioning to trying to offer value-based pricing for all my projects. As for tools that I use, I used FreshBooks for a while. I had a trial with FreeAgent, and I really like that, so I'm considering switching to that full time. And to manage my projects, I used to use Basecamp, but now it's primarily I use Asana.
Okay. You mentioned FreeAgent, and I will just pipe in there. I cannot thank those guys enough, because for many reasons my company's accounts got screwed up going through another service that we won't name, and I had to redo the entire thing, and thanks to its bank reconciliation actually working, unlike this other service who advertised it but didn't actually work, I managed to get my accounts done in 4 hours. So I mean, that was like very, very quick. But it's, I think, probably either as a freelancer or as a small business owner, one thing that I would highly recommend is get the right financial tools, because you can get so many things wrong, and you can end up in a lot of trouble if you don't have the right tools. I mean, I suppose that's going back to the point about value-based pricing. Obviously, value-based pricing isn't about raising your prices, but have you seen an increase in the amount that you are making, the increased revenue per project as a direct result, or are you just winning more contracts since using it?
I think in the process at the moment of switching over. So I think in the past, I'd say 6 to 12 months, my mentality I've matured as a developer, as a designer, as a person. I think that's going to help me price myself better in the market. But I think I've done some work for Gary, I've done some work for Joe, and things like that. They've helped me slowly raise my rates and give me that confidence to start thinking, yeah, I've got these skills, I've got the experience to do this, I can offer this. So I think value-based pricing, it makes sense for me to adopt that as I go along now.
Who is your target audience generally, or who you think would be kind of a better fit for the value-based pricing model?
I'd probably go for ideally small businesses, so I can probably tell them that if they want to increase their online sales or their online visibility, I could do that with the skills that I can offer. I'm hopefully going to be putting this into practice. A friend of mine starting up as a personal trainer, so I'm hoping that's probably going to be one of my next projects. So I'm hoping to use that as a test platform in a way to put my new pricing structure and my new the workflow that I've got now to use.
And how are you?
Sense at all?
Sorry, yeah. And how are you kind of? What's your primary method of marketing to the potential clients?
Most of it has been word of mouth, but I'm hoping I've got a couple of things coming up. I'm trying to do a couple of videos. Going to start writing a bit more. Hopefully, just trying to get my name out there a bit more. So it's not just reliant on one channel of bringing people into me.
Okay. One of the struggles that I think everyone has is trying to make sure that you are not just bringing in leads, but bringing in the right leads. What sort of qualification process do you have at the moment, and how do you sort of sort the tire kickers out from the ones who are likely to be a legitimate, worthwhile project?
I recently signed up. There was a discussion in the Slack group about WP Elevation. So I've signed up for that, and I'm working through the material that was provided there. And just for now, I've got one of the example project request forms up on my website. So that should hopefully, with the questions that are there, I'm going to be tweaking it as time goes on, but that should hopefully give me a better idea of what the client wants to start with, and better determine if they're the right kind of person I want to work with or not.
Okay. Now, who was it who asked? I think it was Claire. Asked, how long did it take you to build your own website? Now, I believe that you've recently gone through a redesign, so it's quite an appropriate question. But how long did it take you to build Base 93?
The version that's up now, it's been continuous. So I'd say about 3 or 4 weeks. I've been building something, and then I'll leave it overnight, and then I'll come back the next day, and I'll go, I don't like the way that element looks inside that box, so I'll change it. But it's been about 3 or 4 weeks at the moment, and I've used it. It might have been taking a bit longer. I've used it as an opportunity to experiment with new techniques, new practices and things like that.
Do you see your website as a showcase for what you can do for clients, or do you see it more as a tool that's just straight and narrow, let's just get something out that will help you capture new business?
It's a bit of both. If you want to capture I think that if you want to capture the right leads, then you need to show what you're capable of. So it's definitely a place to get people in touch with me, but at the same time, it's definitely a place to show off what I can do and what I can offer and what value I can bring that company down the line.
What new techniques? You said using new techniques for the sites. Can you explain those?
I'm getting my head around something that Harry Roberts is talking about, the block elements modifier method. So I'm playing about with that, changing the Genesis grid system. So from what it comes normally, I've been using a tool called GridSet. It's a service-based. It was designed and developed by the guys formerly from Mark Bolton Design. So that's a good tool. It lets you design your grids for your desktop and for your desktop, tablet, and mobile, and things like that. So I've just taken the time to play with new tools, and yeah, it's something that I can use that now. I know I can implement it inside the Genesis child theme. I can probably use that then on a client project 6-12 months down the line. So I know I've got the ability to do so.
Are those tools SaaS based?
GridSet. It's a web tool, so you sign up for an account and then it's a point and click. You can build your grid from there then. You can export it. It'll give you normal HTML, CSS, and it'll also give you a SAS file with mixins that you use the @include function to include the grid that you want to display inside your style sheet then.
And where does the name Base93 come from?
A lot of people ask me, and I honestly can't remember. I was just throwing things together. I let one of my old domains expire, so I was desperately trying to come up with something, and I just randomly came up with that. Checked it on Namecheap, it was there, and I'm happy with it, so I've kept it.
And the new techniques and the grid set and kind of the other bits that you just mentioned, is that something that will go towards a starter theme, or have you got an existing starter theme that you use for client work already?
In the past couple of weeks, I've been putting everything that I normally do when I start a project off inside the child theme. So I've literally stripped the Genesis style sheet empty, and I've started adding things back in the way I want it to. There are some things in it I wasn't quite happy with. You'll have a widget declaration at the top of the style sheet, then nothing at the bottom, another widget declaration at the bottom. So it makes sense to logically group those together. So I've been going through things like that, and as a benefit, so for example, with the Genesis navigation, I've split it up into navigation. Then you've got primary, secondary, and header. If I'm building a project now that doesn't require the primary navigation or the secondary navigation, because the links are inside the header, I can simply just delete the includes for those two files or comment it out, because I don't need it in my framework anymore. So that reduces the amount of code that's actually in my final CSS file.
Okay. And I mean, what tools do you use? Obviously, we touched on a couple of these tools, but which code editor do you primarily use? Is it Sublime or Atom?
Yeah, it's Sublime Text, but I think yesterday people were talking about Atom in the Slack group, so I've given it a try. And at the moment, it's a pretty nice tool. I might consider switching over to that in the near future.
And how much do you use snippets? Because obviously Sridhar released his own Genesis snippets pack the other week. I mean, have you had time to try that out, or do you have your own range of snippets that you use?
I've got it installed in Sublime, but I haven't used it yet. I use another tool called Dash, and I've got a lot of Genesis-related snippets inside that. And I use a tool I launched on the Mac called Alfred, and it's got Dash integration. So I'll just type Dash space and then start typing Genesis whatever, and it'll paste the desired snippet inside Sublime Text for me.
Okay.
I was going to say, just to pick it up on that, for Dash itself, you can also use it as a kind of a code reference or code reference documentation to do that. And I previously generated some documentation for Genesis 2.0, and one of the community had changed that into a Dash doc set. So again, I've got Dash and I've got Alfred as well, so I can start typing to Alfred on the Mac and just start typing Genesis space, and then I can look up any function just like that without having to open Sublime Text and start looking through the code. So very, very useful.
Yeah, a good time saver as well. I'm pretty impressed with the combination of the two at the moment. I can see how it's going to speed up my workflow, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. There's a WordPress doc set, and there's a PHP doc set, and there's a ton of other doc sets that may or may not be relevant. But those, I completely agree, is massive time saver. I think I tried Dash, the trial or the free version, for a couple of days, and I'd used it so much in those kind of 2 or 3 days that it's like £15, $15, €15, something like that.
And cheap.
And yeah, it's like, no, that's got to be bought straight away. It's just so useful.
I mean, it's a good point that obviously we should always be trying to increase our workflow rate and the speed that we manage to do our projects in. You said that you took about 3 to 4 weeks for your current website. What would you say is your average turnaround for a customer, for example?
I'll normally ask them beforehand for if they've got a project time frame. So if they say we want to launch in 2 weeks, then I'll say I can try, but it depends on you pulling your weight as well as I do as well. But it obviously costs more. But I think it's at the moment it's hard for me to say or give a definitive answer to that. I think it depends on the per project and if they give me the information beforehand.
Okay. And something that's becoming more and more common, especially if you're involved in the Genesis Slack group, as we are, is accessibility. Now, how much time have you put into enabling accessibility? Is it something that you look at the moment? Is it something that you're looking to use in the moment, or sort of where are you with it at the moment?
It's something I'm aware of. It's something I think everybody's aware of, but I think it's something that isn't done very well by a lot of people. I mean, if you take a look through Dribble or a lot of design websites, you'll see stunning designs, stunning concepts, but they'll use white background and neo-white text. I tend to, on my projects now, I'll use the Genesis Accessible plugin. There's another one I've started using which adds accessibility to the Gravity Forms things. Gravity Forms WCAG plugin is on the WordPress website. I think a lot of it comes down to common sense. I mean, you're not going to put text that's hard to read over a background. But it's something I'm aware of, it's something I'm trying to keep in mind when I'm designing, when I'm building, and it's something that, as on the whole in the community, can only get better from now on, especially with people handing over so much useful information. In the Slack group, we've got an accessibility channel, and the amount of useful content that's being generated there, it's unbelievable.
Okay.
As we're about just over halfway through the show, so if you've got a question for Thomas, then hit us up on Twitter with the UK Genesis hashtag, and we'll get your question asked.
So one of the questions that we always ask people is, if there was one thing that you could change about Genesis, what would it be?
At the moment, I find the framework suits me pretty well. I'm happy with what it does. I'm happy with what it offers, and I'm happy with what I can do with it. The thing is, I find with a lot of frameworks, I think coming from Thesis, yeah, that had some theme options, but I'd rather a theme framework does a group of small things well that I can use than bundle with it 1,000 functions that I probably won't even touch, and adds code bloat and makes things breaks things further down the line. So at the moment, it's a cop out, but I'm pretty happy with Genesis as it is. Maybe accessibility features without having to rely on the plugin, having them bundled in the framework, but I'm hoping that from what I've read in the accessibility channel, that might be coming pretty soon. So I'm pretty happy.
Okay.
If just as we just mentioned the Slack channel there, if you're interested in joining the Slack channel or the Slack group and you're not already on there, Sridhar has registered a new domain with a nice easy link to remember. So if you go to genesis.community/Slack, that will automatically redirect you to an invite. Well, I think it's a Google Docs form to enter your details, and that way we can then invite you to the Slack channel, the Slack group, and in there we've got a dozen, 20, 25 different channels that you can kind of subscribe to choose which aspect of of the community discussions that you want to be involved with. So that's genesis.community/Slack, and that will redirect you to the right form.
So this weekend just gone was the WordCamp London event, which I know you weren't able to make your way to, Thomas, but are there any WordCamps that you're looking to attend in the next 12 months?
I was thinking about WordCamp Europe, but I probably won't be able to make that. I'm hoping something might come up, maybe around Manchester. Hopefully next year there might be a WordCamp Birmingham or something like that again. I think I'd never been to one up until WordCamp Birmingham, but it's something I definitely want to do more of in the future.
What did you find you got out of that WordCamp Birmingham?
I got to meet a lot of people from the Genesis community that I was previously only talking with through Slack or on Google Hangouts. I got to learn a lot about different people's workflows, how they approach certain topics or projects. There was one superb talk during it about building a catering website with WordPress and multi-site and advanced custom forms. And there was also some the opportunity to network with fellow developers, designers. I built a couple of relationships up from that then. So overall, it was a pretty good experience.
And is there any? Can we expect to see you speaking at any events in the future, or?
Maybe if I can get some decent traction on my blog, get some good articles, some good videos up, I might consider submitting a talk proposal. It's something I'd definitely like to do, give back to the community, because I've learned so much, I've taken away so much from it. I'd like to start giving back a bit more now.
Are there any meetings, monthly or otherwise, for WordPress that are near you?
Not that I'm aware of. Probably the closest would be
Manchester, right?
Manchester would probably be the closest to me, but a little bit too far just to go for a night, something like that. But if something was a little bit closer, I'd definitely entertain it. It'd be great to have something in Chester or something like that. That would be pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's quite a good community of developers in Chester, but unfortunately nothing particularly Genesis related in that area. It's something that personally I'm looking at trying to get started either in Liverpool or Chester, but I think that's quite a good example of one of the interesting things that came out of WordCamp London. It's quite related to your position that there's a shortage of good WordPress developers who know what they're doing. And a lot of the big agencies were admitting over the weekend that they're really struggling and trying to find somebody. Would you ever consider going in-house as a full-time distributed worker, or do you prefer the freelance lifestyle?
The freelance lifestyle is great, but at the same time, if an agency came up to me tomorrow and said, here's a solid wage packet for you, we've got a job, you're guaranteed a job for the next 2-3 years at least, it'd be a pretty tempting offer, that one that I would probably accept. Being freelance is great. You can structure your own day as you want. So I find that my working patterns, I work well in the morning, don't do that well in the afternoon, but sometimes during the evening I work a bit better, so I can schedule my day around that. But yeah, if something came up full time or in house and the wage was good compared to what you could do as a freelancer, what the rates I offer at the moment, it's
I think we frozen up there.
Yeah, unfortunately, as you might have guessed, Tomos is in the deepest, darkest depths of North Wales and will occasionally lose signal. So while we're waiting for Tomos to regain a decent broadband connection, we have got, who have we got up on the next show, Gary?
On the next show, we've got Angie Vale is Purple Baby Hippo. Is the fantastic company name.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously we've got a couple of questions that have come in during the show for Tomos, but if there's anything that you can think of that you'd like to ask Angie, feel free to drop a tweet at UK Genesis, and we will save them ready for next fortnight when we speak to Angie on UK Genesis. So Gary, what would you? Obviously, one of the big things that came out, and we'll ask a more technical question related to Genesis while we wait for Tomos. Probably the biggest topic at WordCamp London was very much that the REST API. What's your position on it, and so how do you see it impacting Genesis?
I don't think there's necessarily going to be a whole lot that Genesis Core could do in terms of making use of the REST API. If there is, I haven't thought of it. And I don't think it necessarily needs to try and kind of use the kind of new shiny stuff just because it's there. For those who don't know, kind of the REST API is basically a way to, like any API, it's a way to communicate to get data out of WordPress and to put data into WordPress without necessarily having to use what we now know as the admin. So, for instance, a mobile app could use the REST API to pull out data and to kind of write new posts without using the current one that most of them use is the XML RPC approach. The REST API, it's quite technical, but there is something called RESTful kind of approach to APIs that use a set of verbs to communicate and so on. But I think Genesis itself is not in the position to use it. It already is in WordPress admin, and because of that, I think it can just do kind of almost like not direct database calls, but it can use the functions that come with WordPress itself, whereas kind of perhaps some of the REST API would be for third-party applications, software to connect to particular websites. Whereas, say, if Genesis is already installed on a website, it's got direct access to those WordPress functions and therefore the database already.
Fair enough. Right, it looks like we've got Tomos back.
I apologise for that. My machine just froze up, so I had to close out and come back in. I apologise for that.
Well, one of the questions on my list was to say, well, I mean, we said you're kind of in the deepest, darkest North Wales. Presumably you've got a kind of low bandwidth connection there? I mean, on our screen you're appearing quite kind of pixelated because of the low bandwidth. Is that a problem at all in terms of communicating with clients or kind of just the work in general?
It can be a problem with things like this. If I want to hang out with a client or hang out with a group of people, it can be a problem. Like that, things can be slow. But at the same time, there's a benefit to it because my connection can be so slow at sometimes. I have to design when I'm building a website. I'm trying to get it to load as fast as possible on my slow connection. And if I could get it to load pretty fast on a slow connection, then I'm pretty much guaranteed that if someone's browsing on a connection 4 times as fast as me, that the website's going to work pretty well for them as well. So
yeah, I've got to echo that as well. I recently moved from Virgin Superfast broadband, which I think was about 50 megabits per second, down to about 6 megabits per second on Sky, and it's definitely opened my eyes in terms of sort of how important having a fast loading website can be, and making sure that images are optimized, because there's nothing worse than seeing an image roll as it loads. So yeah, I agree with you entirely on that. There are benefits to having a slow connection.
If for those who have got a fast connection, some people might not know, within Chrome DevTools, there's an option to view the site with kind of a mobile set of tools. So you can use it to change the user agent string. You can use it to change the screen width or the viewport width. And one of the things also on there is to change the connection speed. So you can emulate having a low speed, be it a low kind of 2G or 3G, compared to just your standard desktop, and it will therefore it will show you those images loading slowly, and so you can get an idea of how poor connections would view a website, even if you're still on a fast connection.
Welcome to my world.
You just do it all, you do it all the time, Thomas.
So Andy had a good question, which was, did you learn PHP before you started WordPress, or did your journey into the wonderful world of hooks and filters and other questionable PHP techniques start with WordPress?
When I first jumped into WordPress, it was strictly building out a website to look nice. I wasn't bothered about writing PHP code or anything like that. I just wanted it to be based on WordPress. But as time went on, then the need became apparent to learn PHP to be able to interact with the server. During my time at university, an emphasis wasn't placed that much on content management systems or WordPress and things like that, but on developing for my course on PHP, mainly with PHP, so I had to learn it from there. And it's been a benefit, thanks, jumping into Thesis and then jumping into Genesis afterwards. I've got that base then to start working off. So, for example, on the UK Genesis website recently, I've been working on the podcast airing date, making it update automatically. So if it's displaying before the time of the live podcast, then it shows one message. If it's during the podcast, show another message. And without being able to know PHP, things like that, that would have been impossible for me to do. So start with WordPress, and then if you want to do something, read up on PHP website, Google, Stack Overflow, things like that. If you're in the Slack group, jump in there. But it's something that if you want to become a good WordPress developer or a competent WordPress developer, it's something that you're going to have to eventually venture into and learn.
One of the more advanced things, and it's something I've got on my to-do list to learn for 2015, is about kind of automated deployment. And there's a question from Glenn Dixon. Thank you, Glenn. He's asking, what kind of deployment workflow or tools do you use?
I use Git mainly to back my work up to, I'm normally using Bitbucket, but as far as automated deployment goes, I'm more of a, if something's finished and I'm happy with it, I'll push the files via FTP, and then I'll use something like WP Migrate DB then to keep a sync between the live site and my dev site. I'd like to be able to, down the line, just to be able to do something like the Beanstalk or Deploy HQ to be able to automatically push my code, but it might be something I end up looking into in the next couple of months. If it shaves off an hour or so of my time and makes things a little bit easier for me, then I'm all for learning new things.
And I think it's not just the potential time saving, especially if kind of you're on a slow connection and FTPing is going to be a pain in the posterior, then being able to kind of automate it so that you can regularly deploy, even if it's to a staging site, and to do it to try and eliminate that aspect of human error, saying you uploaded 3 out of the 4 files and you're missing an image file, for instance. I think being able to do that is one of the reasons I want to learn it, and it's well worth the investment of time, I think, if you've already invested your time in perhaps even more useful things like Git as version control.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're coming into the last 10 minutes of this fortnight's episode. So if you have any more questions for Tomos, do drop them onto Twitter at hashtag UK Genesis. What's the future hold for you, Thomas? Apart from if an agency swings and gives you an amazing offer.
I want to continue to I want to work with smaller type businesses. I've found from experience that they might be a bit easy to work with. I'd like to be able to. I've got a couple of videos coming up, especially around using SAS and integrating that with the Genesis framework. And if that goes well, then I'd like to be able to start recording more videos, giving back and helping members of the Genesis and WordPress community. And yeah, hopefully working myself up to possibly being able to be in a position to give a talk at an event if an opportunity does present itself down the line.
Okay, so we do have a quick fire round. Unfortunately, most of the questions that we had on it have been answered, so we won't go back through them again. The next one is who would you, obviously we've got Angie on next week, but who would you like to see on the podcast in the near future?
I think it'd be interesting to see James on it. I know I met him for the first time in the WordCamp Birmingham. So I think he's working for a company at the moment, but thinking of maybe going down the freelance route down in the future. It'd be interesting to hear about his journey, and possibly hope I'm going to pronounce his name right. Carlo. I met him at the WordCamp Birmingham. I think he was in WordCamp London with you guys as well. Yeah, definitely it'd be interesting to see, because believe it or not, I'm actually younger than James, but getting some younger people in the community, yeah, it'd be interesting to get their take on things as well.
Do you think that age has an impact, or?
Are you saying the rest of us are just ancient, or?
No, Gary, you just had longer to learn.
Well, that's it, yeah. Age is just a number of experience.
Yeah.
I think
outspring. Oh, was it? Oh no, that joke didn't quite work as well. PHP string output. Yeah. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's actually a good point. Did you learn through any structured education, or did you end up finding yourself, sort of teaching yourself?
There were
obviously you came into the world of web design and web development through school, but I mean, did you find any sort of? Did you do like an IT course at college? Did you go to college? Did you go to university? And so on and so forth.
I say most of the stuff that I've learned, I'm being able to do the things I can do now. I attribute 99% of that to doing it myself, writing some code, watching the screen just turn white to output 1,000 errors on me, fixing the code. When I was at school, GCSE and A levels, the focus on IT was mainly just writing reports. So there's nothing really there to teach coding and get kids and people interested in that. University, I studied a degree in business IT. So the focus in that was primarily business with a little bit of programming. But what they did teach with, I think the only programming class I did with PHP was like an intro to PHP. And that covered things that I was already confident and knew how to do. So I mean, there's a benefit of doing programming in university and stuff like that, but for most things, if you're going to be doing WordPress developments and things like that, you're better off installing a copy of WordPress on your machine, writing some code, breaking something, and then finding the solution to that. And who knows, maybe 6 months down the line, you'll see the same problem again, and you'll be able to fix it in half the time, with a different method. Yeah. And there's a lot to be said about teaching yourself versus formal education, I think.
Interesting point. How long do you think say if somebody was watching this in today or in the future and they were interested in becoming a WordPress developer, not necessarily on Genesis, but why they wouldn't use Genesis is beyond me. But if they were fresh off the boat, let's say, how long do you realistically think it would be before they could, sort of feel comfortable? Is there a certain amount of time? Is it just a case of, Are there certain things that they need to get their head around first that will speed up the process? What would you advise people?
I wouldn't consider time a factor because I've been working with WordPress since 2007, I think. So I'm still learning. And I think with WordPress having such a low barrier to entry, I mean, nearly every web host like HostGates and things like that, you can install WordPress pretty quickly. You can grab a theme from ThemeForest, and people can feel comfortable building websites with WordPress. The distinction, I think, comes then being able to build something yourself, not relying on something that's got all the bells and whistles, and knowing down the line if that resource was taken away from you and you couldn't use it anymore, could I confidently recreate something that looks like that acts like that works like that by myself? And if you can't answer yes to any of those three questions, then I think it's then the time you tell yourself, okay, I'm stepping back, I'm going to install WordPress, I'm going to open the single post file, and I'm going to look, what does this tag do, what does that tag do? I read the codex, I'll find the support group, join the Slack channel, and then this is how this works, this is how that works, and then that's how you start building up. But I would not say that give someone the idea that in a year you'll be a good WordPress developer, because everybody's got different methods of learning, and it'll take longer for some people to adjust to coding PHP than it would take someone else.
Fair enough. One last question before we start wrapping up. If there was one thing in the WordPress community that you could make disappear, what would it be?
I was going to say ThemeForest. I was going to say ThemeForest, but I'm going to hold myself back because I think it's helped increase the popularity of WordPress and get people involved with it. If I had to say ban one thing, it'd have to be trolls, because you see people spending so much time on useful open source plugins, they're not getting paid, and then they're getting shot down by someone behind the keyboard who probably doesn't even know how to build half the stuff that they're talking about. It'd be interesting to put them in front of an audience of like a couple million people and say, go on and you build something, let me tear it to shreds right in front of you. So yeah, be trolls, I think.
Fair enough. Okay, so where can people find you online?
On Twitter. Bring it on. On Twitter, I'm at Tomos Win, and you can find me on my portfolio at base93.com.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us, Thomas. As we mentioned before, in a fortnight's time, we will be interviewing Andrew Wynn of Big Purple Hippo. It's such an awesome.
Purple Baby Hippo, Angie Vale, yeah.
Yeah. So once again, Thomas, thank you very much for joining us, and obviously, some slight technical issues, but
I apologize for
persevering. And we will see you all in a fortnight's time.
Great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, guys.